All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time from this beautiful day to be in the Zoom life, which doesn't really, I guess, count with lake life or beach life or whatever. I'm Rebecca Graves, and I'm the Education Services Librarian down at the Health Sciences Library. And then I'm going to turn it over to Janice to introduce yourself.
I'm Janice Dysart. I'm an instructional and research services librarian for, I'm based in Ellis Library, and my emphasis is in the sciences.
Great. And today we're going to talk about maximizing your impact by having a distinct identifier. So reducing that name ambiguity, and then also some tools to make you and your work more discoverable. As we go along, if you have questions, you can unmute and just ask, or you can use the raise hand feature, or you can put your question in the chat. We do have a handout for this program or this class, and it was sent out to those who are registered, and it should be in the chat. If you don't see it, if you joined in a little bit later, let us know and we can repost it in the chat. And so to start out, looking at some of your names, I'm familiar with many of you. So I know you're probably familiar with that whole confusion around names of people having similar or the same names, people changing names for various reasons, the cultural conventions on names around, is it the family name or the personal name that's first, and then hyphenated names also comes in there. People change institutions. They might shift their focus in their research. And also, if you have graduate students in a lab and you want to track their careers to see how you have, because you mentored them and you had an impact on them, you can also use IDs with this as well. And so the one that we're going to talk about first, and I'm going to share my screen, make sure I'm sharing the right one. So you should see Libraries, University of Missouri. So this is a guide that Janice has created that is a partner to this workshop. And it has the researcher profiles noted on the left. And I'm going to start with the ORCID. And so how many of you, I'm trying to expand it so I can see most everybody. How many of you have an ORCID number if you want to? Okay, see one hand going up, and if you don't have your photo on, just if you could do raise hands or thumbs up. Okay, so I see some thumbs up. So we recommend that folks get an ORCID if you don't have one. So, and what that stands for is the Open Researcher and Contributor ID. It's been around for a good 9 years now, and it's backed by foundations and universities and publishers such as CERN and the Wellcome Trust, University of Barcelona, Cornell, Wiley Blackwell, Nature Publishing Group, etc. And the idea is that you can have your own specific identifier. So I'm going to click on ORC. It's a pronounced orchid like the flower, but not spelled quite the same. So for those of you who don't have an ORCID number, you can actually click on the register and register right now. And it's easy to set up. It's becoming required for certain journals, highly recommended for others, such as Springer Nature. And I'm going to pull up one. So if I pull up, I have Sergei Kopykin. I'm also going to do another colleague as well, but I wanted to start with him. So you see that it has the ID number prominently on the upper left, and then it will show other ID numbers. So there's some other ones that Janice will be talking about, Research ID and Scopus. And it will show alternate spellings of your name, forms of your name, your employment, education, invited positions and distinctions, have membership, funding, and then of course your work, your published work. When you're setting it up, it'll ask you which work is yours. Once you have it set up, you can give permission to sources such as Crossref, which does the DOI numbers for articles. And because that program works with ORCID and it will pull in articles. So as you publish and your article gets a DOI number, and your ORCID number is associated with your name, then they can actually pull it right up into your ORCID profile without you having to do any work. You can also do that with Dysart, another program, if you have a lot of data that you publish. And you can search on people. So say I was interested in Professor or Dr. Joanna Chase. I can search on her name, and then I see, yes, this is her, the first one, and I can click on the ORCID number, and then you see her record has come up, again, the number. She has a Scopus ID number, but not the loop or the researcher ID number. And you can see she's got employment, education, and works. So she's a younger researcher, so her profile isn't as extensive yet. Also in a different field, she's in nursing. And Sergey he's in physics, right?
Right, physics, astronomy.
Astronomy. So as you'll hear throughout this talk, a lot of this is all related to the field that you're in. So what is a good number? What's a good metric? What information needs to be shared is partly determined by your discipline. And if you're curious about the Loop profile, that's actually from Frontiers Media, which is an academic publisher that focuses on science journals. It's also a partner with Nature Publishing. And again, I mentioned that if you work with a lab, if you have students, graduate students that you're mentoring, if they have ORCIDs, it makes you easier to follow their career over time, because you don't have to try to like track their name down. Maybe they changed names, shifted discipline, etc. So that is just a brief overview on ORCID ID. Does anybody have any questions on it?
Rebecca, don't you have the option when you're setting this up to make it public, to make selected information public?
Yes. Thank you. I knew I was like, I'm forgetting something. So mine is up here. So if I go to my account settings, or if I look at my record, see how long it takes it to pull up. There's 3 different settings that you can put it at. So you have everyone. So if you look in the upper right, it should pop up. You should see it. You can have it open to everybody. You can have it just to trusted parties, and you can have it only to yourself. And you can do that for the different sections. And also if you give other institutions like Crossref access, you can say they can see what everybody sees. They can see what the next level down, what only trusted partner sees. Or you can say they can see my entire record. So you have control over how much information other people can see about you. And they've added, actually, and this is cool too, I think, this is new. They've added that you can get a QR code for your ORCID number. So if you want to put it on a poster or I'm not sure if you'd need it really for a website, but if you had other handouts, you can generate that so that people can use their phone and be able to pull up your profile. And so you can see here how you would set this up. So this is what it looks like on the back end. And so you could change information, you could make a copy if you have to, if there's a document or a work that you can't find online and you need to manually create it, maybe there's a couple that are similar, you can copy and edit. So they do, it is very, I find it very functional. So with that, yeah. Right. And again, it is updated once you have it set up, and once you allow those permissions in there, it will be automatically updated. All right. So did I miss anything else, Janice? I think that covers it.
I don't think so. I mean, we'd encourage people to at least make their publications public.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and possibly your grants or fund, whatever you think is important to share and make you discoverable and make you look attractive to other folks that might want to collaborate with you on research. All right, so I'm going to drop us back here for the next one, and then I am going to stop share so then Janice can take over.
Let's see. Okay, Rebecca talked about ORCID, which is one that you have to set up yourself. And now I'm going to talk about the Scopus ID, which is one that is automatically set up for you once you've published a couple articles that are indexed published in journals that the Scopus indexes. And Scopus, if you're not familiar with Scopus is a very large database. It indexes a lot of stuff, but primarily scholarly journal articles in all disciplines. So to get to Scopus, I'm just going to looking for a database and just type in Scopus. And the Scopus is one of our more popular database, one of our more heavily used search databases on campus. And we're going to do an author search. And I'll stay with, we'll do Joanna Chase. We'll just look her up. And you can see in Scopus that Scopus is tracking the variations of her name that she's publishing under. You can see she's got two variations, and the affiliation and how many articles she's published that are at least indexed by Scopus. And if we click on her name, we'll go to the Scopus profile. And you can see up at the top, they list her ORCID. And this number here is the Scopus number. And it's only really of significance to Scopus, but you can link to this author record by using this URL up here, and you can see it incorporates the author ID number in this URL. And for people who subscribe to Scopus, they can see the complete author profile and all the articles she's written, 32 documents. People who do not subscribe to Scopus will only, I think, see complete records for the first 10 articles, and they'll see some information on the other articles. But if you go down through the page, you can see they, summarize how much her articles are cited. They track her co-authors. They're just getting into grants. So you can see they don't have any grant information on her yet. And Scopus is just getting into preprints too. So they're tracking a lot of things here. And this is something that, as I said, it's automatically set up. So what you should do is once a year, if you don't use Scopus more often, once a year, you should go in and look. Once you've published at least 2 articles, you should go into Scopus and look at your author profile and make sure they got everything correct. I mean, I think it certainly helps them if you have an ORCID and you're using the ORCID on your journal publications, then it's easy for them. But particularly if you have a common last name, they can occasionally get things mixed up where they say you authored an article that you did not, or possibly there's an article you authored that's not there. It has to be in a journal that Scopus indexes. But if it is, you can request that Scopus add that article to your record, your profile. And notice up here at the top of the screen, there's an edit profile link. So if you see any changes you think they should make to your profile, you can click on this edit profile. and it'll take you through a wizard that will allow you to make changes or submit changes, suggested changes to your profile. Now, in order to edit your profile, you do have to get an account with Scopus, and that's just up here in the right-hand corner. And you just have to set up your account with your email and your name. That's all they want. And then you create a password. So you do have to log into your Scopus account to change your record. But that's really all you need to do. I mean, they're getting better and better about getting the records accurate. I've been helping people update their profiles for a long time. And I'd say, 10 years ago, I was making a lot of changes on people's profiles, but lately not too many, or some that are kind of a little unusual problems, but usually they get everything right. And they're also getting much faster about making corrections. It used to take weeks, and now usually they make the correction in a few days. So any questions about Scopus author profiles?
There's a Julie Cap has a question about, so will we help keep these databases updated? And so at the health sciences end, we do a yearly look at publications. And if we see people, I first set up names, and I'll have to check and see if your name is on that list. But if we see that people have multiple entries, multiple IDs, we do put in a request that they be merged. So that's a long way to say, yes, we can help out with that.
Can you help out with something like looking at our CV and making sure the right kind of documents, all the documents that are allowed to be in there are in there?
Not the entire packet, but if you had the publications list, we do look at that, and we can find quality, the impact of, I'm blanking on the phrase they have for the promotion and tenure letter, but the impact of those documents. So we focus more on that publications section.
Mm-hmm.
And also like impact, like if you wanted your H index, if you wanted other impacts that Janice and I will be talking about during this hour, we could help out with those as well.
Okay, well, speaking of H index, that's the next topic. And you'll notice Joanna Chase has an H index of 12. And I'm wondering, just by a show of hands or thumbs up, how many people are familiar with the H index? A few. Okay. The H index is it's a metric that was developed about 15 years ago by a physicist from Spain named Jorge Hirsch, and he named the metric after himself. And he wanted to create a metric that indicated both productivity and impact in a single number. And he came up with the H index. And what the H index is telling you, her H index is 12, and that's telling you that she has written 12 articles that have been cited 12 or more times. Now, obviously, she's written more than 12 articles. She's written 32, but so far, 12 of them have been cited 12 or more times. And so as she publishes more articles, gets more things cited, her H index will be rising. And by itself, I won't say the H index doesn't mean a whole lot unless you have a really, really large H index. But it's relative to your field. So in order to know if this 12 is that, considered a good H index, you really have to look at other people that are her cohorts. They're people that are researching. She does research in nursing who have been in the field about the same amount of time, because obviously people who have been researching for many, many years and have many articles published chances are they're going to have a much higher H index. If you're just starting out and you've just published 2 articles, they may have been cited each hundreds of times if you had really hot articles, but your H index can only be 2. That's because you've only published 2 articles. So it will change over the years. Hopefully it'll, gradually grow. And Scopus computes it for you based on the data that they have. You can compute it yourself if you want to. I've got on the little online guide, there's a section on H index. And I just put together a little example of somebody who just listed their articles and ranked them by time cited. So it's cited the most first, and then it goes down. And you just start counting down. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when you get to the point where your article number is greater than time cited, you back up 1. And in this case, the H index is going to be 6. If this article number 7 gets cited 2 more times, her H index will go up to 7. Or if this article number 8 gets cited at least 6 more times, it'll go up to 7, and so forth. So you can compute it yourself if you want to pull together all the articles you publish and how often they've been cited. You can figure that out yourself if you want to. So that is the H index. And let's go back to her. Any questions on the H index? I'll let Rebecca keep an eye on the chat because I can't see it.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Just that there were a couple of folks who were not familiar with the H index. So good to cover it.
It's not really something you control, other than that you try to publish, good research that will be cited, in journals of quality journals that people read. And that's how you can get it to rise over the years. And let's go down a little. Let's look at one of her articles. Over here on the right, you can see how often they've been cited and how often an article has cited. For years, that's been really the main indicator of quality for an article, is how many times it's been cited. And that's been the case for years and years. And let's look at her article here that's been cited 7 times. And if I click on the title, I'm going into the full display. And if I scan down just a little below the authors, you see this section called metrics. And it's how many times it's been cited, how many times it's been viewed. And you can click on view all metrics. Scopus has started collecting a lot of different metrics besides just how many times an article is cited by other people. And in the past, I'd say 10 years, maybe just 8 years, a whole new set of metrics has come out, and they're called Altmetrics. And they're metrics that are counting the number of kind of social mentions the article has received, or social uses, like how many times the article is viewed online, how many times it appears in news stories, how many times the article is tweeted. I almost said tweeted. Those are all considered alternative metrics, Altmetrics. And Scopus, which is a database produced by Elsevier, uses a company called PlumX, which is another company owned by Elsevier. And PlumX collects a lot of these different metrics for articles. And if I click on this view PlumX details, I get a much nicer summary of what's going on with this article. And this particular PlumX likes to use this little colorful icon, which each spoke of the represents a particular kind of altmetric. And you can see orange is how often it was cited. Purple is how often people using Mendeley, which is another Scopus product, how many people have downloaded it into Mendeley. And then this kind of yellow is how often it's in the news. And you can click on these links and you can see what's going on. Like it's been in the news, it was in medical health news. So currently, I'd say these altmetrics are probably of most interest to the author. Once you've written an article, it's nice to, in some cases, you know, within a very, very short amount of time, be able to see that people are reading your article, they're commenting on your article, they're tweeting about your article, whereas you have to wait months and months to see if somebody's cited your article. So it's kind of immediate, not quite immediate, but fairly fast feedback on your research. But whether it's going to count, you know, really make a difference in promotion and whether or not you get a job, that remains to be seen, because it's still a fairly new area. And I thought I'd show you a few other places to get altmetrics. PlumX through Scopus is one way to do it. Let's go. Well, let's just go up here. There's another database besides Scopus, which is called Dimensions. And Dimensions is a database that just came out actually just a few years ago. And there's a free version of it. And you can also get a paid version, but the university doesn't have a free, we don't have the paid version, but the free version does give you a lot of information. And I just click on this access free web app over here on the right, and I'll get to the database. And it indexes articles from all disciplines. You can see it's up to over 121 million articles. And these are just most recent first. You can search by subject and author like you can other databases. But I'm just going to sort these articles by what's called an altmetric attention score. And Dimensions uses a company called Altmetrics, altmetric.com, to collate the different kinds of metrics for the articles that are in their database. And you can see the articles with the most attention, not unsurprisingly, have to do with COVID. And see this altmetric, this little colorful little rectangle here. If I mouse over it, a little pop-up box comes up, and you can see this article's been blogged, it's been tweeted, it's on Facebook. And if I actually click on the altmetric button, like PlumX, it'll take me to a bigger page. And like PlumX, they use colors to indicate the different kinds of social metrics they're recording. Altmetric gives a nice map, so it kind of shows you, so far this article has been mainly of interest to people in the United States and Brazil and Spain, which not unsurprisingly is where there's been a lot of COVID outbreaks. So it's just, interesting information to look at. And what's nice about Altmetric is it covers policy documents, which depending on your field might be of use. I don't know if this has any, it does have some policy stuff where policy documents are mentioning the research. And also altmetric.com is one company, PlumX is a company, and now publishers are starting to collect this information. And I'll show you one example of a publisher that's doing it just so you can see what it's like. And Plus One is a prominent open access publisher. And I'll just look up, this article came out a few years ago and it drew a lot of interest. It's on insects, number of insects decreasing over time. And if you look at the article, this is on the publisher website, you'll see actually up in the right-hand column, they summarize what's happening with this article somewhat, how many people have viewed it, which is quite a few, how many people shared it with others. They also have a little metrics button, and this was what you'll start seeing on a lot of publisher sites. They'll have a little metrics button. And so once you publish something, you may want to check the publisher site to see if they're collating metrics, or in the case of some publishers, I know like Elsevier, they'll give you an author dashboard once you've published an article with a journal, and you can monitor the different metrics that are occurring with your article. And in this case, you can see there's been almost, well, a little over 100,000 downloads of articles. So, and you can see the interest. And actually, Plus One has started monitoring other places like PlumX is doing Mendeley, and so is Plus One, and they're doing Twitter and Facebook. So it's just kind of a new area, which I find pretty interesting to see, you know, what's happening to articles once they've been published. And the research is being done to see if an article is tweeted a lot, or, you know, promoted a lot in social media. Does it get more cited references? Do more people cite the research? Preliminary research is sort of indicating that seems to be the case, but there hasn't been a definitive study yet to say one way or the other. But I would encourage you, you know, if you're into social media, that publicizing your research certainly doesn't hurt. Okay, any questions about altmetrics?
All right, I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Okay, then I'll let you take over, Rebecca.
All right. So I am going to share my screen again. So we're going to segue back to profiles again. So that was we talked about the ORCID, and that was the Scopus authority profile, going into the topics of H index and altmetrics. I'm going to go to the Google Scholar profile, which we also have noted here on the guide for this class. So again, show of thumbs up or hands. How many do any of you have? I'm looking over at my other screen. Anybody have a Google profile? All right, I see 2. All right, I'm seeing 2. So I'm assuming the rest of you do not. So if you go to, I guess that was 3. So if you go to Google Scholar or scholar.google.com, you can click on my profile and set one up. And this is one that you have to do yourself, but it is free. And Google's pretty ubiquitous. So you might weigh that to say, okay, it's worth the time and the effort to set that up. I am going to search on Joanna Chase. Actually, I have her up. So if you search on the person's name, they should come up at the top of the page with a little quill. And when you select it, Google Scholar allows you to upload a picture when you have your profile. They do recommend that you set it up with a non-university or a non-institutional email, just so it makes you more mobile, but you do need an institution email to make it public. So again, once you create this, you can select what your areas of study are, and then you can post a link to a homepage if you have one. You can have your email accessible so that people can get to it. They don't show the email, so robots can't crawl it and take it. And you get to decide whether it's public or not. So you can set that up. What it lists is your work. It's not going to show your grants. It's not going to show your honors the way that the ORCID does. It's focused more on the work. So you can see the different publications that Dr. Chase has. And then on the right, you can see how many times they're cited in Google's database, and then the year that they were published. On the right-hand side, they have some metrics on the work. And so you see, they also calculate, like, so they have how many documents you have, how many citations you have, and then what's the H index. And you notice that this is different from the Scopus H index. And that's because these two databases are pulling from different pools of information. They should have a pretty broad overlap, but Google Scholar's better at pulling in books and book chapters. And if you're in social sciences, if you're in humanities, that might be a good reason to set up a Google Scholar, since so many of these programs are set for journal articles, which is what a lot of the sciences fields look at. Google Scholar also has I10 Index, which is simply another version of the H index. It's basically saying, well, let's just look at the last 5 years of your career and see how many citations have been cited at least 10 times. So again, that would, for a new researcher, that's going to be a low number. The longer you're in the field. And it's interesting that her I10 index is higher than her H index, which I'm going to have to puzzle that one out. But it's the number of publications with 10 citations. Ah, I get it. It's 10 or more citations, not necessarily. I think it's slightly different than the two. But so again, there's a lot of different metrics on how to count your information and count your productivity, like how many times you've published, how many times you've been cited, then looking at the H index as Janice described it. So there's additional ones. So part of that you can kind of go into a Alice in Wonderland tunnel with it. So one way to be clear on that is to check with your department and then check with your institution which metrics they look at, and also with your field. Do they care about the I10 index, or is it just the H index? And if there's something that they don't care about, then you don't need to spend time on it unless it's of personal interest to you and helps you with your productivity. And again, so you can create from the Google Scholar main page, you could click on the link there to create it. If you're looking at somebody else's, you can click on get my own profile. I already have one. So they're going to say, hey, verify that it's you, and then log in. If you don't have one, then you would click on sign up and just follow their instructions. So again, they recommend that you use a personal email just for flexibility, but you will be prompted to add an institutional one in order to make it public. They will present you with articles that they think are yours, and you can say yes or no to accept them. And once you have it set up, it's fairly automatic because Google crawls a lot of repositories. We'll talk some about that going on, and also Google Scholar. And so it'll pull in articles that it thinks is yours. You may need to go in periodically, whether you pick a day that you go and check your Scopus account. You might check your Google Scholar account and say, are these articles mine? Because they may find some that aren't yours, but they think they are yours. And you could delete those, and maybe they missed a couple. So you could add in the ones that are possibly missed. And so that's Google profile in a nutshell. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Janice for the researcher ID.
Well, I really am not going to say too much about the researcher ID, other than, let's see, here we go. Oops. Let's go back to, let's go back to all the researcher profiles. There's quite a few on here, and I'm actually not sure I even put researcher ID on here. Oh, I need to change the name. Web of Science has really just started having a researcher ID, and but I don't push it much because they make you do all the work. Actually, they want you to go into Web of Science and claim your author record and go through it and make sure it's correct. And right now it's still kind of in beta, and so I think it's more work than it's worth at the moment. I think I'd wait a little longer just till they iron things out. But you can, I mean, actually, even Web of Science, just searching an author's name is still a little tricky. The Scopus, it's much clearer. You can search on authors' names and actually find it. In Web of Science, it's a lot harder to track down names that are more common. They're still finessing their system. So that's what I'll say about that for the moment. There are some other researcher profiles you can see. If you're in NIH, if you get NIH grants, you'll be doing a bio sketch. There's some commercial sites, social networking sites that you might be interested in, depending on your research and the kind of community of researchers you deal with. Academia.edu is one. That's actually, as I said, a commercial site, even though their name makes it look like it's an educational site, but it's a commercial site. ResearchGate is probably the most famous of the commercial sites, and it is primarily, I think, science and social sciences. Humanities, I think humanities people are starting to use the Humanities Commons, which is not a commercial site. So that's becoming more popular with humanities people. And these sites are just something that you may just want to try them out, create a profile on them and see what it's like. You'll get a lot more probably communication from other people with profiles, and whether you like that, or whether you've already got too much work to do and you don't want more emails, you may decide you don't want to be on some of these other profiles. So but just keep them in mind. And probably everybody knows about, the University of Missouri now has their own kind of faculty profile site that they're hoping will encourage collaboration among researchers on this campus and other campuses. And also it's a way to publicize the research that's being done on this campus. So that's something that's just taken off in the last few years. So researcher profiles are here to stay, and how many you want to, keep track of and tend to, it's really up to you, other than the one like Scopus that is automatically done for you. And you really don't have to do much with that. So any questions about any of the author profiles?
All right.
Or researcher profiles?
I am not seeing any come up. All right. So I think next up is repositories, right?
To close, I'd say ORCID is one you really should have. Check your Scopus ID. Google Scholar, it's nice to have one because that kind of publicizes you more to a broader spectrum of people. And then anything else, it's really up to you and the type of work you're doing.
Okay. All right. So now I am going to go back. I'm going to continue on with our talk, and we're going to look at research repositories, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So talking about your ID, but now talking about your work, like, so how do you make your work discoverable? One way is to publish it, but not everything is a journal article. So if you have data sets, if you have a conference paper, a poster, if you have other documents that you want to share, that you want to make discoverable, you could use what we call a repository. And we have on the guide 3 of them listed. The first one is MOspace, which is through, excuse me, the University of Missouri. Now, I want to make a caveat, depending on your funding, you may be tied to a particular repository. So for NIH, you might be tied to PubMed Central, for example. But if you're not tied to a particular repository, you could consider ours, which will give you permanent storage. It's crawled by Google and other search engines. You get a permanent URL that you can share and post. And again, if you are working with students, you can have them post here as well, because this is open to all at MU. And I'm going to click on a tab here to show you what MOspace looks like. So you can drill down by authors, by titles, by popular items. You could also search it. Oh, before I go into searching it, if you want to submit works, if you look in the blue bar at the top in the upper right, it says submit works. And if you click on that, it'll give you information about who can submit and how to submit. And PDF is the preferred format, but there are other ones that are accepted. And I'm trying to think. So for example, if I search, Hunger Atlas, actually, let me go back and search from the main page. I always double check my spelling, but I'm pretty sure I was good with my spelling and my typer. Here we go. So they have the Missouri Hunger Atlas, and I am looking for the most current one, which looks to be 2016. And if I select that, it'll take me to that document site, and it gives the authors, it gives the link to the document, the URL handle, related items that are in here. And again, PDF's the preferred one, but we do have other files in here. We have WAV files and photo files, etc. And at the bottom, you can see there's statistical information. So if I click on that and I load the statistics, so again, those altmetrics, so this isn't in a journal, so you're not going to get citations from another journal article specifically, but you could look at how many times it was viewed, which is the orange, and how many times it was downloaded. You can look by country, and you can look by, by views and by downloads. And you can, they have a chart and drill down for some popular works by the authors. So that is one of the huge benefit of a repository, is that your work can get discovered. So it can be kept someplace where it's going to be permanently archived, and it's going to have a specific URL, and it's going to be able to be discovered by search engines such as Google Scholar. So we do highly suggest that you check out MOspace.
Okay, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Okay, and from the chat. Are there copyright issues if you post preprints here, or does it depend on the journal?
That is an actual excellent question. And I am going to jump ahead in my piece because I was going to show Figshare. I'll come back to that. But there's another site called Sherpa Romeo, which looks at publisher and journals open access policies. So if you had a journal article, you could come into Sherpa Romeo. Now, hopefully you do this before you sign anything. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking to publish. Look at what the contracts are, see how many rights you can keep, especially if you're working with multiple colleagues. Have a discussion before you submit the work to say, what type of rights do we want to keep? Do we want to be able to use this in our classroom? Do we want to be able to put this on, a repository? So if I look at the journal gut, just because it's easy to type in, I can bring it up, and they have this key down here of what can be published. Is there an open access fee, and like what the fee is, which repository you would put it in. So you can check that. I'm not going to go through this key. It's makes sense once you read about it, but we're limited on time. But you can see that you can easily search the journal and check their policies to see, like, can you put the published version in? Can you put, so yes, you can if it's required by funder. There's an open access fee associated with it. There's no embargo. So you need to open the link. If you are looking for funding, so this is Sherpa Romeo's looking at by journal. There are other Sherpa services. So if I come down to the bottom where it says Sherpa services, they have Sherpa Romeo and they have Sherpa Juliet, of course. And that is the one that looks for funders policy on open access. So if you go to Sherpa Juliet, you could, I'm not being very creative at the time, but if I do National Institutes of Health, you can see what their policies are, and you can drill down. So that is a good question. So depending on what rights you have retained in any contracts you've signed, that would determine which repositories and which, like, could you give your author's manuscript, or can you actually do the published article? Which one can you put up? Can you post your data sets? Can you post the images if you created any? So those are all things to keep in mind when you're doing your work, is how much access and rights do you want to retain? So you can negotiate that and be clear about that in the front. And then check out, Sherpa Romeo for journals and Sherpa Juliet for funders. Going back to repositories, in addition to ours at MU, which is MOspace, there's other ones such as Figshare, which is a privately created one. They have a free version and a fee version. So depending how much you want to store. So if you don't have a repository associated with your institution, depending if you move away from MU, or if you're not required to use a specific one from your funder, you could check out one like Figshare. And again, I'm trying to think. I had a search lined up, but
You usually do one on monkeys.
Yeah, I do. But I was thinking I also do one on beer, and I was going to type in monkeys and beer, which maybe would pull something up. But I was like going, wait, I don't want to, conflate my two searches. Yeah, so here's the one. I love this one, the comparing monkeys and college students. And so you can see Figshare, they've been around a bit longer. They have a little bit more money to put at their product because they are private company. And so, excuse me, you can see that they have the Altmetrics donut or circle showing how many times this has been looked at, so their views, and you could pop out for the usage metrics and summary of the document, and then here's the link to it and categories. And then when you come down, here's the data that's associated with it. So they have some figures, they have a data set. So that's another piece too. If you're looking for data sets, repositories can be a great place for you and or your students to look for that. And so how I'm thinking right about now on today, the monkeys would be as good or better than I am with some math problems. So just keep that in mind when you're producing your work. Where are you going to place it? Now, repositories aren't for work in progress. They are for the finished work. So your finished data set, your finished poster, your finished manuscript, whichever one you have the rights to post, etc. And I think that is enough on that. Any questions? Oh, I do want to point out back on our guide about maximizing your research identity. We do have another one listed here on Zendo, but we're not going to cover that because of time constraints, but you might want to check that one out as well. So I'll stop sharing.
Okay, we're right at 4 o'clock, so I understand if people have to leave. I was going to wrap it up by talking just a few minutes about journal rankings, because certainly to get your research visible, you want to publish in quality journals, and there are different rankings you can look at to try to get quality journals. And I'm just going to talk about the one that's been the most widely used and known, and that's the journal impact factor. However, there are some new ones. There were a few people registered that were in the humanities, and I don't know if they're live here today or not, but if they are, the two journal rankings that do cover humanities journals is the one called CiteScore, which is done through the Scopus database, and Web of Science has come out with a new value for journal rankings called a journal citation indicator, and that does cover humanities journals in addition to science and social sciences. But I'll just briefly talk about the journal impact factor, and I'm sure some of you have probably heard about it. And mainly it's a numerical value for a journal that essentially indicates how often, the average number of times articles are cited when they're published in that journal. That's kind of the quick summary of it. They base it on, I was going to say 2 years of data, but they may have switched to 3 years of data. And you can find it, you find the impact factors. You usually can find them on the publisher site. They usually will list it, but we have a tool called the Journal Citation Reports that you can access through the library. And there it is. They just came out with a new interface, and we're not going to do that. And so they don't quite have everything working yet, but you can just type in the name of a journal. And there it is. And look up the impact factor. They do not assign impact factors to all journals. It is the journal, it's the science and social sciences journals that are included in the Web of Science core collection. Those are the journals that have their journal impact factors computed. And so Policy Studies is one of those journals. And if I come down here, I can see the journal impact factor. But just like the H index by itself, an impact factor doesn't mean a whole lot. You really need to know how it is relative to other journals in that field. So if you come further down, you have to keep scanning down on this screen. And there's rank by journal impact factor. And you can see that this journal that has an impact factor around 5, that ranks at number 7 out of 47 journals in public administration. Now, this journal is also ranked in political science, and the 5 makes it number 17. So there are more political science journals ahead of it, but it is in the first quartile. Now, if you want to see the other journals in these subject areas, which you may, when you're looking for a journal to publish in, you may want to look at the journals ranked by impact factor in a particular discipline. Right now, you have to go back up to the top of the screen and click on Browse Journals. And no, I don't want to be shown around. And now you want to filter over here on the left, and you can filter by category. And they've actually added some humanities categories like music and art. But let's look at, we were going to look at, well, let's look at political science. Go down here. There it is. And I'll just check that off and apply. And now you can see the political science journals that have impact factors. And I didn't actually forgot how many there were. There's, whoops, my 294. So it really depends on the field, how many journals are in each field. And so you can look through these and try to find some journals that where you could publish your research. Now, as I said, it's all relative. Like the top journal in political science has a journal impact factor of 8.6. Now, just to compare, let's go back to, let's look at another category. These impact factors are going to depend on how often, how much citation, how many people are citing, how many researchers are in a field, and how often they're citing other researchers. So we'll go back into categories. This green means I've already got one selected. So I have to, I'm going to deselect my political science one. And let's just come up here to oncology, because that's a field where there's a lot of researchers, there's a lot of research, and they're citing each other a lot. And we're going to apply that. And looking at this, you can see the top journal has an impact factor of over 500. And this may be the most cited. This may be the journal with the highest impact factor. If not, it's pretty close. But you can see the next one down drops quite a bit, but it's still 66 compared to, you know, like a 5 in political science. A 5 in oncology is going to be a lot farther down on the list. But you can see it's all relative by like I10 Index on how many researchers, how much they're citing each other. And so it's all relative. But the thought is that, you know, if you're publishing in articles in journals with high impact factors, your research becomes more visible. You'll get cited more often. Now, there certainly is criticism about journal impact factors, and there are people that don't like them at all. And I think I linked to an article too on my about that on the guide, but it is, I'd have to say, the most widely accepted journal ranking at the moment. Certainly at the University of Missouri, this is the one that campus administrators always seem to mention when they're talking about evaluating faculty and trying to get people publishing in high impact journals. So any questions on journal impact factors?
I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Or any questions about anything else? Because that basically is what we wanted to cover today.
Well, there was one question in the chat about what we spoke about today would we suggest for new researchers, and I had said definitely the ORCID account, and then also the Google Scholar profile, since Google and Google Scholar are so widely used. And Janice, I don't know if you have any other.
Those would be, yeah, those would be the two main ones I would suggest that you go ahead and set up. And then certainly if you start going to, you know, conferences, making presentations, and you don't have anywhere else to post those, you know, consider MOspace, so you can have them permanently saved and have a permanent URL so you can link to them in the future.
Right. And there was one thing, I don't know if they are doing it currently, but in the past, some of the campus publications departments were working to publicize research done here on campus. And so what they wanted to know was about your research before the publications came out. So if you have something that you think is going to be important or is going to make a big splash, talk to the publications or publicity departments ahead of time so that they could have a write-up ready to be released the day it's published. So they don't have to like try to produce it and it comes out a week or two later when the news cycle's already moved on. And then I see there is in the chat, Judith is asking, what does JCI stand for?
JCI.
In the chart, because it has the, so the 20, because it has the JIF quartile and then the 2020.
JC, that is the journal, that is the new metric that Web of Science has come out with, or Clarivate is a company that produces Web of Science, and that's called Journal Citation Indicator. And it is assigned, it is computed for all journals in Web of Science, not just the ones in core. So, and it's I guess what you'd call, it's a normalized metric so that you can compare, you could directly use it to compare an oncology journal with a political science journal. So that's why you can see these have, well, this journal still has a 77, so that's still going to, you can see it's still going to be way up there, but you can see the others, the value is much smaller than a journal impact factor. And I do have a little information that metric, whoops, oh, I guess I was, I guess I linked from my guide. There's more information on my guide, but that's a metric that really just came out last month. So it's totally new for them. Let's go back to oops. Okay, it's journal impact factors. Right. It's Journal Citation Indicator. So it'll be interesting to see if that one becomes widely accepted, because it's, you know, covering a lot more journals than the journal impact factor. But as I said, it just came out, so we'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for hanging in there. And if you do have questions, you have our contact information. And we are, thank you again for attending.
And we'll send out a recording of the workshop in a few days.
And I will stop the recording.
Okay.